You're listening to the Foreign and International Medical Graduate Show, a podcast to inspire physicians in the process of immigration to the United States and access to graduate medical education. We create meaningful and helpful content that motivates medical students and doctors throughout the world, with the goal of creating a community that supports itself and gives feedback to each other, that stays updated with the most recent tips and advice on how to make it in America and become a successful resident or fellow in the speciality of your dreams. Dr. Alonso Osorio is board certified and residency trained in both emergency and family medicine and will be bringing you 20 years of his personal experiences, struggles, and motivation. We'll be chatting with people like you to talk about the lessons they've learned along their personal path, how to make an impact, and how we can all benefit from it. Also, we'll analyse the current resources available and how to benefit from them. Thanks for joining us. Please enjoy the show.
Hello, superstars, and welcome back to the Foreign and International Medical Graduate Podcast. I'm super ecstatic today. I'm like blown away by the amount of excitement that I have going on in my heart right now because I was able to bring into the show someone that is an outstanding immigration attorney. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Mr. Gregory Siskind. Mr. Siskind is one of the founding partners at Siskind and Susser, immigration lawyers based out of Tennessee, the headquarters. But he has kindly agreed to talk with me today and share with you guys basic common sense on immigration law. Thank you for being with us here, Mr. Siskind.
My pleasure.
Mr. Siskind is a bachelor's degree magna cum laude from Vanderbilt University at the age of 19 in 1986. Then he became a graduate in law at the University of Chicago in 1990. And he has been ranked top immigration lawyers in the world. He has been number 5 by the Who's Who Incorporated Immigration Law. He's also a member of all the academic entities in immigration law. He is the founder of Siskind and Susser Professional Corporations Immigration Lawyers, and he has created VisaLaw.com in 1994. That is the very first immigration law firm website in assisting people across the world. And he has partnered up through a specific website that allows him to reach out to more than 25 different countries, including Canada, to assist people in immigration issues in the United States. Having said that, Mr. Siskind, I know that you've been in practice for about 25 to 30 years. I would say 28 to be precise. Is that correct?
No, this is my 30th reunion. It was supposed to be last week from law school, which got canceled because of the pandemic. But I was planning on going to that. I
hope that I can come across with my face the amount of excitement that I have of having you here, because my listeners have been craving and literally craving information on how to become eventually a citizen in the United States, but that's too far down the road, how to immigrate, how we get to the United States with a visa. What do we do if I'm, in my case, a Colombian, born in Colombia, a country that back in my times had not the best reputation in the world? I'm lucky enough to get not only one H1 through my residency program, I'm able to get a second one through my employer in Iowa through across the border. And then I'm able to rapidly get sponsored to get the labor certification. And 5 years after that, become a citizen of the United States. But it's been a crazy path. It was not easy. And the initial question that I'm going to throw out there, why an immigrant physician shall seek professional and advice and counseling in an immigration attorney like you?
Well, I think the answer is probably that even though we've had these pathways for doctors from an immigration perspective for decades, it is considered to be one of the more complex parts of the U.S. immigration system, so much so that most immigration lawyers in the United States won't touch doctor cases because they're too complicated. There actually is a separate organization from the big immigration lawyers organization that is just focused on physician immigration law because it's a subspecialty that's considered to be complicated enough that a lot of lawyers felt like they needed to have a separate bar organization just focused on that subject because it was so specialized. There are a lot more agencies that are involved with physician immigration. So unlike regular immigration, where it's just basically the immigration agencies, here all the state health agencies are across the country are involved. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is involved. The Department of Labor is involved. There's a lot more steps in a physician case than in other cases. Now, with that said, most of the time people don't interact with an immigration lawyer until they're actually in their training and finishing up their training and wanting to remain in the United States after that. So you wouldn't typically have a lawyer involved with getting you to your residency program. And I don't know if you did, but it would be unusual. Now, the residency program itself may have a lawyer that helps with all the processing.
That was correct.
The doctors won't typically go out and find their own immigration lawyer for that. And a lot of the doctors who come on J1s, for example, it's a much simpler path for the institution to sponsor than it is, say, for an H-1B. So they may not use a lawyer for J1 sponsorship. But you will, at some point, if you want to remain in the United States, want to have a lawyer helping with that process. Now, I will give the one caveat that I will give to this is that it's a good idea to talk with an immigration lawyer and at least understand what you're getting yourself into as far as which visa path you end up taking, because it can have big consequences later on for your family and for your career, depending on what paths you make before you even step foot in the United States. So I think that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, The Physician Immigration Handbook, which I think is how we had started when we were talking before. That book, there's a chapter about that subject, about how to choose, what the differences are between the two big pathways, the J1 pathway and the H1B pathway, and what the requirements are for each, and more importantly, what the advantages and disadvantages are for each. So it depends on, a little bit on your situation, but if you pick the wrong pathway, you could be giving yourself years of headaches.
And Mr. Siskind is referring to his book, The Physician Immigration Handbook, in the 3rd edition that I acquired through Amazon. And you partnered up with one of your attorney partners, Elisa Taub. Mm-hmm. And you have written a fantastic book that I think every single physician willing to immigrate in the United States has to kind of read through, because it's an easy read, has fantastic, easy explanations. And believe me, Mr. Siskind, I'm rather impressed by the deep knowledge that you have about our situations and all the struggles. I'm going to tell you the truth. It is a struggle. Becoming legal and doing it the right way is a big deal. So thank you for putting this material together, because it means a lot to me, and that's how I found you. And I want to really thank you for replying to my emails and getting this done for us. So having said that, and giving you credit for the book and everything that you have done for physicians, and you said clearly that you're always more than excited to enlighten physicians about the immigration process. So let's go back.
It seems like a lot of bad information gets passed along on message boards. And, just from talking to a secondhand source and all that. And I think people can get some good information early on, then, they can avoid. And I've seen so many situations where doctors come to me and they were like, well, I didn't know that this was going to cause this kind of problem if I did that. And, and we were just talking about beforehand that if you're going down one road, it may seem perfectly fine. But if you are looking for a certain kind of practice, you want to be in a certain part of the country, you have a certain kind of background, you have family members, maybe American family members. It's, you could make very good choices or very bad choices inadvertently. And that's hopefully what I can give people a little bit of help today.
Awesome. So let's go back to the basics. There's 2 ways to make it into through the booth of immigration. The first one is you're getting through the FMG permission to come and take the Step 2 CS through an invitation of the EASA FMG, and you might be given a little small visa just to come in and take the test, and you get a small window of time to take the test and get back to your country. Then eventually, you probably obtain visa as a tourist to come for your interviewing process, and you stay here in the United States for a month or 2 while you do your interviews, and then you go back to your native country and do the match. And you finish the match and you match successfully, and here you are. You find yourself, for example, in my personal position in 2000, looking for a residency position through the scramble. And that was nerve-wracking. And I was lucky enough that I come across a rural underserved track at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And they said, and we are sponsoring an H1. Would you like to come along? And I'm like, oh my God, not only I found a spot, and I found an H1. That's very rare. So the two options are J1 or H1. Can you talk briefly about what it takes to be one or the other?
Yeah. So the H-1B and the J-1, the J-1 is the exchange visitor visa. We've had this J-1 exchange program for doctors for 60 years in the U.S. And that is how, and then the H-1B is the sort of the workhorse skilled worker visa that a lot of people use in professions, not just doctors, but it's your computer programmers and your school teachers and, bankers and all kinds of people, accountants. It's used by a lot of different types of people. The common thread is that they have to be at least a bachelor's holder to come in on the H-1B. The J-1 program the doctors come in on is a specially designed program for doctors. And that matters for a couple of reasons. But the J program, you should know right now, you may not have a choice because most institutions tell you that you have to do a J-1. Now, that's a change from probably about 2006, 2007. It was the H-1Bs probably peaked, and it was about 50-50. Half the doctors were coming in on H's, half were coming in on J's at that time. Then the Great Recession came, and the institutions were under considerable financial pressure, and it was a lot more expensive for them to do H-1Bs, both from the government filing fees and also hiring immigration lawyers in a lot of cases to do the H-1Bs because it's a much more complicated application. And the reason why institutions, they hated doing the H-1Bs all along, but they would do them because the doctors asked and they were afraid they wouldn't get the best candidates for their spots. And they would basically, it was like an arms race. They would do the H-1Bs only because the institutions they were competing with for these doctors were doing the H-1Bs, and they were afraid that if they said, we'll only do a J, the other institutions said, we'll do an H-1B. So they did that. And then it was sort of like they all got permission at the same time to stop doing H-1Bs. So now it's almost like 85% of the doctors coming into the country are on J-1s. We still see H's, but it's typically more not for the PGY ones. It's more for like the fellowships. They're still doing them. They do them sometimes as well if somebody can make a really good case for it. For example, if you're married to a U.S. citizen and you do a J-1, you could be in a situation where, you're forced to be apart from your U.S. citizen spouse, even though you had an easy green card path at the end of that process. So they may sponsor an H-1B in that kind of case. But most of the time, the institution is going to tell you that you have to do a J-1. Now, with that said, there has been a reputation for the J-1 visa that was deserved, but not as much deserved anymore, as being something that is really worth avoiding. And there are a lot of good reasons why I would tell you to think about the J-1 as being not such a bad thing. If your institution tells you have to do a J-1, don't immediately get down saying it's like, oh, it's terrible. I'm going to basically be stuck in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to have my path is going to be a lot harder. There's a lot of reasons why. So a lot of people know with the J-1, the big issue with it is that there's a home residency requirement. Okay. That when you're finished with your J-1 training, you are expected to go back to your home country for 2 years. And some people, do that. But for the most part, the people that want to stay in the United States, they're not going to go back to their home country for 2 years and then come back. Most of them seek out a waiver to be able to stay in the United States. Now, about probably 95% in a given year of the doctors who choose to stay in the United States do so on the basis of a government agency supporting the application. And that's usually based on going to work in an underserved community. In the U.S., they call these HPSAs, health professional shortage areas, and MUAs, medically underserved areas. So one big change that's happened over the years is that there's a very big doctor shortage in the United States. And what that means is that most of the United States is a shortage area now. And if you're not in a shortage area, if a place is not in a shortage area, it's pretty close to being in a shortage area. So you can be in the middle of major metro areas. So I'll give my town, Memphis, Tennessee. I don't know if you've been to Memphis or not, but Memphis is a big city. We have over 1 million people, and about 80% of our metro area is a shortage area. So all of our downtown hospitals, for example, which is where the medical complexes are in shortage areas. To add to that, there used to be also there's a program called the Conrad program, and each state used to be allocated 20 doctors per year per state. And that wasn't nearly enough to meet the needs. for doctors who wanted to stay in the United States. So what would happen a lot of times is the doctors couldn't find a job in the state. Even if they found a shortage area, there weren't enough of these waivers available. Those numbers have increased a lot, and there's been also a bunch of federal programs that have come into being over the last couple decades that have unlimited numbers available. So back to the Memphis example, I'll just mention like St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I don't know if you've heard of St. Jude. It's one of the most famous hospitals in the United States. It's a world-renowned cancer research hospital. They have Nobel Prize winners on the faculty. They have they're doing amazing work there at St. Jude. They sit in a shortage area in our downtown area, and they have a federal program that they can tap into where they can have as many J1 doctors a year as they want, as can basically any of the other hospitals in the Memphis metro area. So that's if you want to be in a major city, you can do it on a J1. If you and even in places where you think that it's not that easy to get to, you can. Now, there was also a very nice change that just happened since the pandemic started in the way of immigration law processing. So in the United States, there's an agency called the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and that's the big health agency at the federal level. They have a waiver program for doctors, a J1 program, and it has been relatively useless for the last 10, 12 years that it's been around, because I shouldn't say it's useless. It's very narrow. So it was just basically rural health clinics, maybe like in Nebraska and Iowa.
Yes, sir.
Tribal health clinics, Indian tribes, and community health centers, which are little health clinics that are primary health clinics and sometimes in big cities, but pretty limited as far as where you can go. Since the pandemic basically kind of, unveiled it basically made it really clear that we have pretty severe physician shortages all over the country. And they changed their rules now. So they will it's still limited to primary care, but they will do a waiver in any facility in the country as long as it's a shortage area, which, a lot of doctors will come to me and they're like, I want to go to Florida. I want to go to Texas. I want to go to California. I want to go to New York. I want to go to, one of these big states that, and they would normally have just like 30 waivers available in those particular states. So Florida is like a lottery every year for the doctors who get to go there. Now that HHS has said, we'll take care of your primary care, Florida, send as many of doctors as you want to us as long as they're shortage locations. And as I said, a big chunk of the country is a shortage location. Now Florida, instead of getting 30 waivers a year, maybe they'll get 100, 200 doctors a year in the state instead of 30. So it could make a really big difference as far as getting you where you want to go. And that has been generally the biggest complaint about the J program, is that doctors can't go to the kinds of locations at the end of the day that they want to go to. So if you can tell a doctor, you want to be, in a big state, you can do that. You want to, if you're dead set on being in a big city, it's possible to do that and still get a J1 waiver. So that's the J1. The other thing I will tell you is if you have a long training program, if you're not doing just primary care and you're out in 3 years, the H1 is a real problem for that because you get six total years in the H1B. We were talking about the H1Bs. I was going to just tell you that for the H1B, there's a limit of 6 years that you can be on an H1B visa unless you are a year into the green card process. And if you have a program that is like 5 or 6 years long of training, you're not going to have enough time to transition into a post-training job. So in those, if you're training in a highly specialized area and you're going to be in training for 5 or 6 years, you really don't have a choice. You need to do a J1.
Let me give you an example for those listeners. For example, a doctor from India that loves internal medicine but wants to be a cardiologist. And once he has finished cardiology, he wants to be an interventional cardiologist. But he doesn't only like that. He wants to be an electrophysiologist. And he just goes on. So he has had 3 years of internal medicine, 2 years of a cardiology fellow, 2 years of an interventional cardiology fellow, followed by another 2 years of electrophysiology. So you've been training for 9 years.
Well, that's a problem too. You get 7 years normally maximum on the J. They can give you an extension for one additional year for under unusual circumstances. The H-1B is a problem as well. And the only way I could see doing that is either you divide it up and you don't do it straight through. You do a J1, then you do some, post-training work, and then go back and do more fellowship. And I see doctors do that. That's not that unusual. They'll do that after they've already gotten their waiver and maybe after they've satisfied their service commitment. The other way you could potentially do that is if you have an employer that you will commit to during your H-1B time, and they will start a green card process for you. Once you get to a certain stage in the green card process, you are allowed to file for extensions of your H-1B.
Okay.
And potentially go for longer than 6 years. But that's not that easy either, because you got to find an employer that's willing to do that for you and go through a green card process. And most of the time they don't want to do that without you, like, at least trying you out and seeing if they like you before they start going through that very involved, very expensive process for you. So I have a feeling most of the people that your listeners are probably not looking at a 9-year training. But if you are looking at a longer one, I would say that the J1 would probably be better.
Okay.
If it's a shorter one, the H-1B, it may be all right. But the other problem, aside from the fact that you have to get an institution to sponsor you to get into an H-1B, and you need to have a basic understanding of how the H-1B quota system works in the U.S.
Okay, please go ahead.
So the U.S. allots 65,000 H-1B visas a year.
65,000.
65,000. But doctors, when they come in for their training, don't have to worry about that because there's an exemption from the quota for universities, nonprofits, basically charitable or nonprofit institutions that are affiliated with the universities, and nonprofit research institutions. So the typical teaching hospital is typically a nonprofit. I think you had mentioned University of Nebraska,
yes,
which
sir.
is where you train. That's a university affiliated hospital.
Correct.
They're exempt from the quotas. So in University of Nebraska, when they bring in graduate medical trainees, they don't have to worry about H-1B quotas. The problem for the doctor is when you are making your first move from a location that's exempt, like a university hospital, to the big corporate hospital in the suburb, the Dallas suburbs or whatever city that you're looking at, and if that hospital or that employer is not exempt from the H-1B quota, then you have to apply for a slot.
Wow.
And for the last 25 years or so, the H-1B category typically has to go through a lottery because there's way more applications than there are spots available. The problem is they set the number of H-1B visas at 65,000 in 1990. Uh-huh. So it is my entire career, they have not added any more. For a couple of years, they added it, and then it expired, and they're back to 65,000. But it's the same number as when I was, 22-year-old lawyer. I don't want to say I just gave away my age, but it's been basically, it's been that the whole time. And the problem with that is this is like they set these numbers before the internet was a thing. They set these numbers, and basically they came up with these in the 1980s is when they designed this system. Mm-hmm. So now when this lottery that we go through every year, they'll have like sometimes 250,000 applications for those 65,000 slots.
Wow.
And it can create a lot of headaches for you when you are finished. So a lot of times people say, I don't want to do the J1 because it's going to limit me on what kind of job opportunities I get in the end. And I want to have the most choices. So I don't want to be stuck going to an underserved area, not realizing for the H-1B, you've limited it to basically just university facilities and nonprofit employers as the ones that you have a chance at. Yes. Versus going anywhere you want. So neither one of them gives you the maximum choice that you think.
What a complicated issue. So in my case, I had a very short program in family medicine. It was only 3 years. And I was lucky enough that I got a second H1 with a different employer, which is possible, correct, in the state of Iowa. And that second employer was willing to do the sponsoring of my labor certification. So let's go back to that. Dr. Osorio was lucky enough that he found an H1. I used it for 3 years. I had 3 years left to figure out my situation. I was working for a university medical center in an underserved community south of the highway that crosses Omaha in between, the north and the south part is considered underserved. I was working in a rural community health center. That was everything that you have said. It was perfectly working out for me. Then I go to Iowa. I start moonlighting on my second year, and they give me another green card. So I think I was able to play potentially with both deadlines. And the second one was the one that I was going to go by. And suddenly my employer says, hey, Alonso, we want to sponsor you. You need to do work for us for the next 2 years. And I got 2 more years.
This was to sponsor you for the J1 waiver or for the green card?
For the green card. So they sponsor for the green card.
So you did the 5 years of service and you got the green card.
Yes.
Right. So that's another sort of advantage of the J1, even though I know you had an H1, is that there's an easier green card path for doctors on J1s typically than doctors on H1Bs. Because
I had that I completely misunderstood. That's actually exciting that you're saying that.
Yeah, and it's probably going to get even better because there's some bills pending in Congress that will make this program even easier. But basically, it's a program called the Physician National Interest Waiver Program, PNIW. And what it was designed to do was for doctors who are getting a J1 waiver, they typically have to work for 3 years in an underserved area. And you were talking about your time working in an underserved area. The system is set up that if you, instead of committing to 3 years, if you commit to 5 years, you not only get a waiver of the J1 requirement, but you get a green card. Now, the one big asterisk I would tell you about that, and this is important, I imagine that some of your listeners are from India.
Correct.
And that would make sense because Indians are about sometimes 40% or more of the international medical graduates training in the United States.
You're absolutely correct. Those are my statistics. My second largest listener is India.
Right. So, which makes sense. And India's got some of the best medical schools in the world, and the U.S. training programs love the Indian doctors because they're really well trained in their med schools. So the problem we have right now for India is it's not a problem until you get to the green card. We have a crazy quota system also for green cards in this country where you have to fit into a certain category where there are certain quotas for that particular category. And the category that doctors fit into, if you're not from India, it's a relatively uneventful path. So you're Colombian, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So you're Colombian. So Colombia never has a backlog, but no country is allowed to have more than 7% of the quota. So India is not only overrepresented in medicine, but they are overrepresented in every field that looks for smart people.
That's a good thing. I love them.
And that's why they're such great immigrants. But the problem is they are limited to 7% in their categories.
Wow.
So it causes a big backup for Indians who can end up having to wait many, many years longer than everybody else. And Congress is finally getting around to addressing that, at least for the doctors. And happily, and part of that's because they finally are getting serious about it because of the pandemic. But there is a bill that's passed already in the House of Representatives that would create an easier pathway for the Indian doctors who go to underserved areas. There's another bill in the Senate, but I'm very optimistic that even potentially by the end of the summer, we may have the first physician immigration legislation to pass in 15 years or 16 years.
Mr. Siskind, so what I can say is that Indian doctors are rather lucky, but not, because you said that they have a quota.
That's the big problem for Indian doctors that are coming to the United States right now is the green card side of the equation. But like I said, the Congress is finally getting serious about doing something, at least for Indian physicians, not for all of India, but for the Indian doctors. And I'm relatively optimistic that we're going to see something happen this summer that should hopefully get rid of the backlog of green card problems for doctors. Keeping my fingers crossed.
So guys, what we thought that having a J1 was bad, what I'm gathering right now from this nice interaction with Mr. Siskind is that actually that might play a better role in the long term?
Yeah, so it depends. So if you're going on if you're doing a very short training, you're dead set against having to work in an underserved area, you have a U.S. citizen spouse maybe. I mean, there's some circumstances where the H1 may be better. But the J1, there are so many different paths designed to get doctors to stay in the United States And the J1 is where all of that has been done. The H1 is basically you're trying to mold, what's essentially a computer programmer's visa into a physician's category, to work for a doctor. And it doesn't in a lot of cases work the way you need it to on there. So, I would say that it's a really probably, and one thing I should mention is that if you do a J1, if you're going to have to convert it to an H1B when you're done. And that's why that's why the doctors that are doing long training programs have a problem, because you have but the doctors that are, when you get your J1 waiver of this requirement to go back to your home country and you're going to work in an underserved community for 3 years, you're going to be doing it on an H1B visa. Once you have finished with that, you will still be on an H1B visa, but you're basically in the best situation of anybody, because
right.
You can work anywhere you want as a doctor. You don't have to work in an underserved area. And the employer can be a for-profit or a non-profit employer. It doesn't matter what kind of status the employer has. And so from the employer's perspective, I always tell them the best doctors you can hire from an immigration perspective is somebody who's just finished their J1 their waiver somewhere, and they're freed up at that point, whether they're Indian or not. Even though the Indians are not going to have green cards, all that. So employers actually sometimes like that, because there's an incentive for the doctors to stick around for a while. But generally speaking, the employers, I think, are probably good with either way for you. But, you have what I do think is probably the most, if I can impart on anything for doctors as a result of this, is the more educated you are about how the immigration system works in the United States from the very get-go, the better things are going, the better it's going to go for you. It's going to ensure that you're on the right path from the beginning, in the right category. When it comes time to thinking about finishing up your training and staying in the United States, if you understand how to, for example, determine whether an area is a shortage area and how to figure out what the rules are for the particular state that you want to go to, and what's going to be in a contract for a J1 doctor that's not going to be in a contract for an H1B doctor. The more you understand about those concepts and how that works, the better it's going to be. The other thing I would tell people is the more planning you do ahead of time, the better. So a lot of times we're at the beginning of June right now. We're still getting phone calls from doctors who are finishing up their training on June 30th, who did not get their act together and really get things going until like January, February. And then of course the pandemic came along. They really, employers were already at that point like completely sidetracked, and their normal recruiting wasn't going on. But the J1 waiver process, you need about 4 to 6 months to get through that. And which means that you need to start looking for a job, probably a year out from finishing your training.
Okay.
And even on the H-1B, if you go that route, because the H-1B lottery that you're going to have to go through is in April, that means you have to have the offer probably in January, February and then the law firm is going to take a month or two to prepare the application. And the pre-application gets filed in March online now. So whatever category you pick, you're going to have to do a lot of advanced planning on it. And that's kind of the theme for all of this, is those who wait until the last minute end up having jobs that they hate because they didn't have choices, in locations that they're not happy with because they got stuck with what was left over, and potentially not doing and not living out the dream that they set out for themselves. So educate yourself, give yourself
that's good that you're saying that. So listeners, doctors, please consider to put your head together way in advance. So you said about a year?
Yeah, and the same thing when you're coming in for training in the United States, when you're thinking about applying for a residency, to get into a residency program in the U.S., it requires a lot of advanced planning. There's a lot of steps to it. You've been through it, there's exams, there's interviewing that's involved. You have to really educate yourself on the programs that are out there. You have to go through a whole get all your documents certified by ECFMG. There's lots of steps in the process, and the people that are procrastinators end up having to take a lot longer to come to the United States than they otherwise would want. So, the earlier you start on all this stuff, the
better off you are. Let's expand a little bit, and if you don't mind, briefly on what are the choices to get a waiver for a J1?
Right. So there's different program. Basically, there's waivers come in different flavors. So most doctors get waivers based on getting the support of a government agency. And that will either be one of the 50 states' health agencies, or some of the territories do them as well, like Washington, D.C., Virgin Islands, Guam have waiver programs as well. So sometimes if you want to go exotic, you can do that. And those waiver programs count as far as like if you go through a waiver program in the Virgin Islands and St. Thomas, which they're desperate for doctors down there, by the way, then you do your 3 years there, and you basically met your qualifications for the waiver, and you can come back to the mainland. And after that, Puerto Rico too has a waiver program. With all that said, 50 states have their programs, and then there's some federal agencies that do as well. So like the Veterans Administration hospitals have their own special program. There are programs that are, I mentioned before, the Program for Health and Human Services. That's a federal program that's all over the country. Then there's programs that are regional. But the key is you find one of these programs that operates in the location where you want to go. So that's one type of waiver.
One of those is, you said the Department of Health and Human Services, the Veterans Administration. I read something about the Delta Regional Authority and the Appalachian Regional Commission.
Yeah, and I know about the Delta Regional Authority because I helped them write their original program rules.
Wow.
They're in Tennessee. They're up and down the Mississippi River, essentially in 8 states. And it's about 250 counties, a couple of big cities in there. If you're looking for being a big city, New Orleans and Memphis are within the Delta Regional Authority's footprint. That's why from a J1 waiver point of view, Memphis and New Orleans are probably the 2 biggest concentrations of J1 doctors outside of, probably the biggest 2, because not the concentration of international doctors, but doctors doing J1 waivers. Those are probably the 2 biggest cities because of the Delta Regional Authority and the state programs that are there. So if you're an academically oriented doctor and you're doing a lot of, you're doing clinical research and you're looking for an academic medical center type of track, there is another program that's run by HHS for clinical researchers.
Okay.
And it is based on, it's for doctors that are doing cutting edge work that is considered to be in the public interest. And a lot of academic medical centers sponsor doctors through that program, and they don't have to, it has nothing to do with being in a shortage area. So if you're going to, a fancy Johns Hopkins or a Mayo or one of those kinds of places, or Mass General, then you could look at potentially that waiver program if you want to stay, after your training is done, if you want to stay and work in one of those kinds of centers doing academic medicine. That's a separate program that's available for that kind of doctor, a J1 program. There are waiver programs as well for people that are available based on hardship. So the hardship has to be to a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, spouse, or child.
Can you tell us what is a hardship?
A hardship is what you can, is not defined, but it can be, for example, if you have a child that has health issues, if you are from a country that has undergoing, like, there's a disaster in the country or something like that. It could be that, if you have a spouse that that doesn't speak the language of your home country and they can't find a job there, and, they it's going to split the family up. But even that, it's not that easy, even if that's going to be the case. So, but those are hardship waivers, difficult cases to get approved. I would never advise a doctor going in to plan on getting out of the waiver requirement through a hardship waiver. I would typically only advise that if they have a really strong case and there's a really good reason why the interested government agency waivers that we've been talking about, why they're not available. It's also a slow process. It can take in excess of a year to get an approval on that. So you have to start planning for that really early. From a legal expenses point of view, whatever law firm you talk to, if you talk to the ones that are good, it's going to probably cost you twice as much as a normal kind of waiver on there for a well-prepared hardship waiver. It's just like, don't go that route without casually. You want to go, you do that when that is the option, that the main option that's available to you for what you want to do.
Got it.
There's an option available as well for persecution, rarely used. It's very similar to political asylum. I would say that There's some reasons why you would file just a political asylum application instead on that, but it's technically available. It's probably fewer than 1% of all the waivers are in that category. The vast majority of doctors are doing it based on these government agency waivers. I would say in a typical year, it's almost 95%.
Do you think
that's how most of your listeners are going to get it?
Yeah. Do you think the United States benefits remarkably from using these programs to get doctors to underserved communities like the American Indians in Indian reservations and little underserved communities? My clinic used to be called the Indian Chicano Health Center. So we had American Indians, American Mexicans, and Mexicans that we were serving, and that was the bulk of my population.
Yeah. So we have shortages across the country now, but rural areas in particular have really, really severe problems as far as shortages of doctors. And rural hospitals are closing all over the country. For a lot of reasons, they're under stress. But rural America is dealing with a healthcare crisis that's pretty severe. And it's gotten a lot more severe because, the pandemic has kind of only basically exposed what they've already been going through for a long time on there. But there are dozens of hospitals that are closing every couple of months in the United States that are mostly in rural areas because they're under more financial stress. A lot of times they have they can't have certain kinds of departments in these hospitals because they don't have the critical mass for them. So there's a genuine need. You're doing really good work when you're doing, and that's why there's so many, these rewards are out there for doctors that are go there. With that said, there's also a big push to get more American doctors to go to these areas as well. And you're all lucky that you're, in some respects, that you're not going to medical school in the United States, because if you did, you would probably owe $300,000 or $400,000 in loans at the end of your medical school education. In the United States, Health and Human Services, the agency I was just talking about, has a special loan program where they will forgive medical students loans if they go and work in these same locations. So it's not just the international doctors that have been incentivized to go to these places. The American doctors have good reasons to go there as well. The problem is there's just not enough doctors in the United States. There's the AAMC, which is the Association of American Medical Colleges. They're the ones that basically regulate all the medical schools in the country. They're projecting a shortage of 120,000 too few doctors in 12 years.
Incredible.
That's just a disaster. It's a human disaster.
So this is all.
You guys.
We need to keep coming in. I know that this match was not as bad as we thought it was going to be. We're still obviously filling most of the primary care positions in internal medicine, OBGYN, pediatrics, family medicine, and so forth. And tell you the truth, I think there's a lot of work to be done by us, and it's hard to retain us. Once we do rural service, we stay there for 2 or 3 years. I know that we want to get to a bigger city, but I personally had the experience to work in rural Iowa, and these people really need you, really appreciate you, and you cannot imagine how happy they are to have a doctor that is actually staying there for a couple of years. And hopefully, if they love you, they're trying to make you stay there forever and just build your practice and stay within the community.
That's the thing that's always amazed me. These doctors, that they go in thinking it's like, I'm doing 3 years and I'm out of there as soon as the 3 years are up. And, I've been doing this now for a few decades. So I've seen these doctors that they were, they were as young as I was when I was starting, and they've kind of aged together. They love these communities and they've stayed there their entire careers. And then what they end up doing, which is kind of remarkable, is they have friends from their home countries that they recruit. And then they start these communities in these small towns that are basically like outposts for people that they knew from back home.
Yeah,
on there. So it's kind of nice.
It is amazing. Mr. Siskind, and how much of a budget should I have prepared as a physician willing to seek the proper immigration law advice? How much you think I should be ready to spend? How much do I need to put up away on my bank account? So
the good news is you don't have to spend hardly anything on the front end going into the residency program, because the residency program is going to cover all the legal costs that are associated with that. You can buy it, invest a little bit in a book, for example, or you can have a consultation with a lawyer, maybe even a couple of consultations with a lawyer, which would be all under $1,000. Like if he's a couple $100 per meeting, if you needed that. So you don't need very much money at the outset. Later on, when you're trying to transition from your training program into a career in the United States, that's when the work really kicks in for the immigration lawyer. The thing to know about that is because there's a shortage of doctors in the United States, most of the time, in some cases, the law requires the employer to pay, but in most of the cases, the market requires the employer to pay because the doctors have a lot of choices, especially if you start the recruiting process and start the process early and don't wait till the last minute. So in most cases, you can negotiate and have the employer cover most of the costs. So I wouldn't worry too much about the legal expenses. Your employer might need to worry about it. But in most of the cases, it's unusual for the doctor to be picking up those costs. They do tend to pick up the costs if they are going sort of a weird route like a hardship waiver or something that's out of the ordinary. But if you're just doing a waiver based on going to an underserved area, most of the time the employer is going to pick up those costs. Didn't used to be the case, but now it is.
Perfect. Mr. Siskind, the other thing is in this personal process of finding you, I came across hundreds, if not thousands of advertisements on the internet. And to find someone reliable with a reputation like yours and the one from your firm and your attorneys, takes a lot of research, I know, but why we need someone with the experience, the reputation of doing this on a regular basis? Because I know that there is, I'm an attorney, I can help you with that, we'll get it taken care of. And I know that some attorneys, and this is not all of them, just a very few, sometimes take advantage of doctors that are not very knowledgeable or proficient in knowing what they have to do. How do I figure out who I need to visit? Why do I need to contact Siskind and
I will tell you, I'd love to tout my firm, but actually the organization that I shared for a bunch of years is called the IMG, for International Medical Graduates, IMG Task Force.
Yes,
and
sir,
just Google that and go to their website. There's the law firms that are a part of that organization are all specialized in physician cases. That's what you want is a firm that really specializes and does a lot of the cases, because the rules change really fast in this area. It's not like a normal immigration case. So an experienced immigration lawyer is not necessarily going to be that helpful for you here if they don't do a lot of the doctor cases, because they're basically, it's like a starting out lawyer on there if they're not filing them regularly. So, but it's like medicine as well. I mean, you go to people, if you have an unusual problem, you go to somebody who has done that, that deals with that kind of patient and has done that same kind of thing over and over again. If you have a normal set of problems, you go to a generalist on there. And doctors have a unusual kind of case. It's not like every other kind of immigration case. So I would go to a specialist for the same reason I would tell somebody to go to a specialist physician.
So you're the chairman of the IMG task force, and I'm going to put this in the show notes.
Yeah,
and
I'm the past chairman. I might have to update that. I got retired after about 10 years doing that with a nice big glass award, and then I passed it on to my successor. But I had that job for a lot of years.
Obviously, I'm biased, and obviously, I'm not getting any profit of this personal connection, professional connection that we're having today over the internet. But Mr. Siskind, I would say that you're the person to go with. And, how big is your team and how we can get a hold of you guys?
So we have a very easy, our website, because we were the first in immigration law, we were lucky enough to grab a good domain name, which is visalaw.com. So if you go to visalaw.com, Visa like the credit card or Visa like the stamp in your passport, visalaw.com, you will find me on there. You'll find my contact information. You can click on schedule a consultation on the front page, and you don't even have to talk to any of our people to schedule. You can book the appointment online in my calendar directly, and I'm happy to talk to you anytime.
Amazing. Well, it's been a bunch of goodness, and it's been sweet all around. It's like a fantastic sugary apple. Anything else you should tell our immigrant doctors? I know that you said that things are only potentially getting better. Do you foresee that things are going to get better for us?
The rest of the world right now is hearing the craziness with our president, and that they're going to be hearing about visa bans and all kinds of things like that. The one thing I would tell you is there are exemptions for healthcare on every one of these things that's happening right now, as far as like these immigration problems. personally, I don't think he's probably going to be there in 6 months, after 6 more months. But even if he is, they're smart enough to have figured out to leave the doctors alone. So physician immigration is still working just fine. And it will be working better with some of the changes that are coming. But with that said, the U.S. really, they love the foreign doctors here. It's about a quarter of all the doctors in the United States were educated abroad. And it's a great environment overall for it. And that's why, it's not just recently, it's for 50 years. It's been about a quarter of all the doctors in the United States. So there's a good culture if you are an international doctor and you're looking to relocate yourself.
Well, guys, we have had Mr. Siskind over an hour here in our podcast. As I said, he has this fantastic book called the Physician Immigration Handbook. It's in the 3rd edition. Please go to Amazon. I think it's one of the best purchases that I have done. I'm impressed by the amount of good quality content that he has. And obviously, since Mr. Siskind has been kind enough to come to us, visit his website at visalaw.com. and book a consultation. His top skills obviously are everything regarding immigration law, physician immigration law specifically, J1 waiver. So who better to do this than Siskind and Susser, huh?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So the phone number to reach him at is 901-682-6455. And their headquarters is located in Memphis, Tennessee. Having said that, call to action. Please leave us some feedback. Leave us some 5-star reviews if you think that Mr. Siskind and I deserve that. And, guys, keep working hard because the American dream of becoming a doctor in the U.S. and getting your training is within the grasp of the hand, but there is a lot of hard work that needs to be done. And thank you for joining us today. Mr. Siskind, you've been kind enough to be here with us today. It's been extremely valuable, and I'm so joyful of having had the chance to talk to you. And I hope that many of my listeners and my followers will be looking out to get to
I want to thank you for inviting me. This was a real pleasure. So, and hopefully we gave some good information out.
Amazing. God bless you.